Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Greetings to you. Well, you are in for a treat because last week I promised you would get more of Aneesh Chaudhry this time, and today we are doing part 2 of an interview with Aneesh Chaudhry, who is a brain health coach and a philanthropist. Welcome back, Aneesh.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Duffy. It's good to be back.
You're welcome. And just to recap, Aneesh, what we talked about last week for folks who may not have heard part 1, we looked at new ways of making connections, of looking at the kind of connections we've had in the past that were part of our taken for granted reality, and now to move into really cherishing them and reframing. And you had talked about even appreciating going grocery shopping, right? And then we had talked about the difference between isolation and solitude, the difference between being alone versus lonely, that all of this has to do, I think that was my sense of it, with self-connection. Mm-hmm. And how can we reframe to more of an inner life and recognize that we can create our own inner life. And we looked at stress, managing our stress. One thing you had recommended, which I recommend to my patients and my clients and my students as well, is the documenting, the journaling, the writing down emotions, because stress is all about believing one is out of control. And just naming an emotion helps people to restore their sense of control. We also looked at, obviously, the serenity prayer. What can we change? What can't we change? And you talked about radical acceptance and those things that we absolutely cannot change. Really, we need to radically accept those things we cannot change. And then we were looking at a question of, how do we get back out there? Can we psychologically even wipe the slate clean? Can we, you had mentioned about opening windows to new vistas. And how do we want to get back out there? And of course, where people are now is they're having a lot of anxiety over fear, because that's the nature of humanity. We don't know the unknown. And so to really make a decision to be self-supporting and to enlist support from others. And one thing I would just throw in is it's no longer a stigma to be anxious or depressed or scared. And it has become more mainstream to ask for help, which in our culture with extreme individualism, we have been shamed for doing. So you had talked about re-enlisting yourself with your own hobbies and creating your own sense of wellness, and of course looking at gratitude and positive affirmation again, and generally to acknowledge where we are at the same time that we're identifying a new standard for ourselves. How do we want to reconnect? How do we move from isolation into community? And a lot of us have community now, thank goodness, to the online world. So does that refresh everybody's memory?
A bit. We covered quite a lot.
We covered so much in 28 minutes. It's really unbelievable.
Absolutely.
Yes. So we are still looking at the question of having a wellness lifestyle, being well. And as the country reopens, in a very mindful way, which in my view is incrementally. How do we hold on to what we have found, something that's been newfound, versus going back? What's your take on that, Aneesh?
The transition period through a significant event such as this is extremely important. I think I agree with you 100% that it has to be handled with care and with delicacy at all levels of the government as well as us as individuals. And I think not just because things open up that we immediately shift back into doing exactly what we were doing before and just living the exact same lifestyle. Like, that's not the right way to do it. I think being open to what people are suggesting, following the recommendations, but then also still maintaining a lot of the habits that we built up during this time is going to be key throughout this transition period of the next 30 to 60 days.
Yes, and you use the term transition, which is really very important. William Bridges wrote extensively on transition and the idea that we have a goodbye and we have a hello, but in the middle is transition, which is fraught with anxiety and all kinds of stress and self-doubt. And some people have said in today's world, as adults, unlike olden times when you were an adult, you were an adult, you were an adult, and today that people have like their life in 5-year spans with lots of transitions in between. So that would be a more constant state of stress unless you, as we talked about in the last show, remain mindful and grounded. But transition can take time, yes?
Oh, it does. I think it really comes down to that good old saying that we've all heard, that life is a journey and not a destination. And I think
Yes.
It's so easy to create these stories in our mind that when things open up, I will do this. And then that pulls us out of the present moment. And you use the key word is staying mindful. And I think being truly present to what is happening right now and understanding that by keeping our attention in the here and now, that's going to help to mitigate the stresses, the anxieties, and the worries, because then we can use all our resources to doing what we can do now to help to mold that future of what we envision for ourselves.
Yes, create the best day you can, and that kind of automatically takes care of our tomorrows.
It does. I mean, the old saying too, I mean, tomorrow never comes. It's true, because they say the present moment is a gift.
Yes.
And when we treat it as a gift and remain in a place of gratitude, I think is also going to be very, very key to this transition, because it's so easy to get upset about what's happening and all the things that are happening around us. But I think remaining in a place of gratitude and counting our blessings is a way to be able to help put a smile on our face and turn that frown upside down.
Turn that frown upside down. I love that, Aneesh. Yes, so there's an expression, I don't know if you've ever heard it. It's when people plan, God laughs. Yeah. So I myself think it's good to plan, to be proactive in planning, as long as, years ago I taught time management, and there's such a myth that if you manage your time, you can plan ahead every minute. No, we cannot. We plan our priorities, and our priorities can even change during the day, during that same day. So yes, what do you say about planning? So living in the moment, tomorrow never comes, doing the best we can today, which helps us with our tomorrows. But there is also the notion of vision, right? We had talked last show about moving forward. What do I want to bring with me into our, shall we say, brave new world? How do I want my life to be different? How do I want to stay mindful of what I did like during the lockdown, during the quarantine? And we're still kind of in quarantine. I mean, people in cities really have it rougher than people in rural areas. Right. So those of us in densely populated areas have to still be quite careful. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. We do. And I think you mentioned about time management. And I know I can speak from my own personal experience that when you're in a place of always watching the clock and letting the clock run your day versus you running your day, that it can put you in a state of never feeling like there's enough time and there's always more to do. And that's a
Yeah.
very tough place to be. So I always like to introduce the concept to reframe people's perspective as rather than thinking about time management, think about energy
Yes.
management and thinking about
Right.
how we can use our energy as a resource. And ultimately, if we're worrying and we're in a state of like kind of lower frequency emotions based in fear, that then we ultimately lose control of our energy and we use our resources spending, worrying, and being in fear versus using that in an assertive way, being able to direct it towards certain tasks and ultimately optimizing our day. Because I've come to realize that, what used to take me, say, 10 hours to do, today I can get done in 6 because I don't
Wow.
work harder, but smarter. And really utilizing that concept of
Yes.
energy management, presence, mindfulness, it takes stress management to a totally different level.
Absolutely. And Aneesh Chaudhry, I wanted to ask you, you made mention of low frequency emotions. Not everyone is familiar with high versus low frequency for human beings energetically. Could you explain that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's different frequencies of emotions, and when people talk about high vibrations, those are emotions that are rooted in faith and love, and more of like engaged. When we want to talk about neuroscience, engaging the higher parts, like the higher parts of our brain, versus the more primitive emotions based in fear and survival. And so, if we always think about, say, for example, we're always focused on paying the bills and like we're always worried about running out of money, can almost manifest how we run out of money versus focusing on how we can thrive and not just pay our bills, but being able to excel at our current position and ultimately making the most of it. And then coming from a place of faith, having faith in ourselves and those around us, and really, really helping to optimize our ability to be productive in the here and now. And that's where learning to cultivate those high vibrational emotions can really be the biggest tool between focusing on what we don't have versus being grateful for what we do have.
Which, of course, is my next question, Aneesh. How do we cultivate those higher frequency emotions? And in the last show, we had talked about mindfulness, and you also had mentioned that meditation is not religious, which I thought was a point really well taken. Mm-hmm. And now you're using the term faith. So I guess I have a twofold question. One is, how do we cultivate our higher frequency emotions, whatever that means? We can still discuss it. And where does faith come in? I always think of faith in a religious context.
Yeah, and that's the first place to definitely clear up is that, there is religious faith and there's nothing wrong with that. We can have religious faith, but ultimately the goal of having that faith is to come to a place of having faith in oneself and belief that there is some kind of higher good or some kind of higher guiding force, whether it's the universe, whether it's Buddha, whether it's Jesus, Allah, whatever form that takes. We have to genuinely believe that there is good in this world. And that's having faith in that good, and then using that energy and that source to being able to drive and propel purpose in our life. Because if we are going without purpose, it's very hard to have faith, and that's what leads us into some of the lower emotions when experienced over a chronic period of time can manifest as anxiety disorders, depression, bipolar, and a lot of different mental illness. So I think that we don't have to feel pressured to follow a religious faith. I always like to address the difference between spirituality and religion, is that religion is following a preset path that perhaps may already be laid out with like a book like the Bible or the Quran, and there's nothing wrong with that, but ultimately using that to draw faith within ourselves and not expecting God to do the work for us, because ultimately it's up to us, but we have to have purpose in what we do. Versus then coming to a place of being spiritual, where when we're spiritual, we can ultimately form our own belief system and what resonates with us. And I always like to say that spiritual people are able to see the purpose in things and understand that even through the thick stuff in life and the tougher things that happen, that there is indeed a purpose, and that purpose is to learn and to grow. And that's why when you're in a spiritual mindset, the whole concept of right and wrong, good and bad goes out the window, and then everything just comes as what needs to come. And then we find our way to adapt and ultimately pivot according to what happens, and then we control our world versus the world controlling us.
Well, that's it. And the idea of a higher power, and we can think about that higher power as internal, as in a higher self. We can think about that higher power as in external, either as an anthropomorphic kind of God, if many people believe that God is actually looks like a physical human being, or a sense of the beneficence of the universe, or even higher power being an organization like Alcoholics Anonymous, higher power being connecting to other people to become mentored, become inspired, so that yes, we have a lot of internal resources, and we also have external resources. And we can benefit from honing in on the positive resources, because there are toxins out there. There are toxins inside of us from our old has-been beliefs or unexamined beliefs. So I don't, that debate about inner or outer, I don't think we even have to go there, right? I think it's both.
And I always like a lot of things that I work with my clients on that I like to share with them is that ultimately our outer world is a manifestation of our inner world. And that if we have control over how we feel and how we respond to the world versus just reacting to whatever comes up, then it puts us in a position of being able to be more grounded and remain centered versus being pulled in so many different directions and acting in erratic ways. And I think that's a very important point to make, that, when we are in a place of faith versus a place of fear, we have faith that things will end up being okay. We can use COVID as an example. We have faith that we'll get through it versus fearing that the world is going to end. There's quite a drastic difference in terms of how those viewpoints are going to ultimately impact one's world. But that stemming from that viewpoint is ultimately going to be what dictates how you perceive everything outside of us. And if you feel the world is going to end, it'd be hard to want to reach out to people and talk to people and have faith that things are going to be okay, versus when having faith that things are going to be okay, it puts us in a much better position to utilize those outer resources in a healthy way.
Yes, and choosing to have faith. It reminds me of the psychologist Martin Seligman, who talked about learned optimism, and the fact that the brain is actually biased toward the negative, right, because we do have to focus on danger so we can stay alert to save ourselves. We have to pay attention to threat that trumps any kind of happiness. So that's the built-in negativity bias, to pay attention to the negative. Mm-hmm. And Rick Hansen and other neurobiologists would say the way to overcome the negativity bias in the brain is when something good happens, to just take it in and concentrate on it for 20 seconds. Mm. And I love that, because I think it's really so simple. It's a very short thing to do, 20 seconds, and to notice how you're feeling when you take in the novel, the good, the beneficial, that which is nurturing to one. Talk about cultivating faith, right? And cultivating our relationship with our higher power, cultivating our relationship with ourselves, as well as with others.
Absolutely. And I'm a huge fan of Rick Hansen's work. And, he talks about positive neuroplasticity and really, really internalizing those positive emotions. And I believe the phrase he uses in one of his books, it says, positive neural traits create positive mental states. And with that, meaning taking the time to really, really sit and bask in those positive emotions makes it so then the negative loses power, because we can't make the negative go away. Like you said, in our brain, that fight or flight response is our physiological protection, and it's there, it's necessary. But when we start to entertain these higher areas of the brain and create these new connections and new pathways, it then puts it so that's more our baseline. And when the fear comes up, we can just kind of casually let it roll off our shoulder. Unless we actually need it, then it's there for us.
Oh, Aneesh Chaudhry, I love that term bask. That is so beautiful, literally, right? I'm thinking of bask, bath, to bathe ourselves and all of our cells and all of the atoms in our cells and all of the spaces inside of our cells and our joints and our bones, our systems. Bathe them all in these positive experiences. Let ourselves be receptive and feel the sensations in our body and just stay with it. I love it. Bask. Bask in the positive. And since we can't really think about two things at the same time, as you said, we can't make the negative bias go away because we need to have a threat of danger. The idea of that we are focusing on something positive, something new. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's extremely important, because when we stay in that place of negativity, it's what we get used to. It really, and it's when we take the time to feed ourselves positive and sit with that positive, we get used to that. And then all of a sudden the world starts to respond to us. And then rather than, we talk about energy and frequency, rather than being at whatever frequency we're around, I think we've had that experience where you see someone that's so positive and they walk in the room and they just light up the room. That's because they have this unwavering faith and belief in self. And then that radiates. And then rather than them stooping down to the level of wherever they go, they raise the energy up in the room. And that's a very powerful place to be.
Yeah, and then radiating out and truly living in our own radiations, because we radiate out from our positive emotions, which are a higher frequency, and our inner light radiates out, and other people feel it, and because of mirror neurons, and because of the one bona fide social principle of reciprocity, right? Emotions are contagious.
Yes.
So if we cannot be in the sunshine, to be the sunshine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then there are areas in the world where there's darkness, and I think darkness plays a role in everything. And I believe that, we can feel that in certain places, but it's ultimately up to us to be able to take that, and it's what we do with it. And we talk about that fear response, and that we can't shame ourselves for having that, because it's not a fault in us. It's literally hardwired in our brain. And I think people that don't have the understanding and the awareness of that, it's so easy to perceive that as a fault in me. What's wrong with me? And getting into that victim mentality. And that's where really it can start to perpetuate, and over long periods of time, bring people into lower states of mental illness. And that's something I faced in my life. And that's why I can attest to it, is because I've seen both sides of the coin. And when you see that darkness, but then you don't want to go back to that once you experience that light, because it's you see and you witness its power.
And especially if you take the time, 20 seconds, as Rick Hansen said, and basking, so that you immerse yourself in that sensation. And so it becomes more a part of you. And the idea of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest, bring it in. So I want Aneesh Chaudhry, I want everyone to know who you are and how to contact you. And your website is Soul, SOUL, Physio, PHYSIO, lifestyle.com. Yes?
That's correct. So go ahead, please visit my website. And if you have any questions, feel free to fill out the comment form and it'll send a message to me directly. I'll be more than happy to get back to you. Also, feel free to connect with me on both Facebook and LinkedIn. My first name is spelled Aneesh, Aneesh. Last name is Chaudhry, Chaudhry. I look forward to hearing your guys' feedback, and I hope you enjoyed the show, because I know I have.
Yeah. Oh, me too. Thank you, Aneesh. And I want to give your website again, which is one word for Soul Physio. So it's SOULPHYSIO, lifestyle, still one word, .com. Is that, no, you don't have, yeah.
It is .com, yeah.
.com, okay. And again, Aneesh Chaudhry, ANEESHCHAUDHRY. And again, Aneesh Chaudhry is a brain health coach. And you are obviously very well read, Aneesh, in the positive power of the brain and the whole fascinating neuro-brain science. And it's so how do you want to leave us? Any last words?
The last words and the best piece of advice I can give is stay calm, stay in faith, and know that this too shall pass.
Yes, and that is the one sentence. This too shall pass. 4 words. That is the essence of stress management.
Amen to that.
Yes, yes. One last question. How can people practice stress management at home? What would be some really simple tips? We have only a minute.
So I want to first off use the first 30 seconds to educate and the last 30 seconds to provide action on that. So when it comes to stress management, there's ultimately 2 ways that we can handle the stress, and that's either reacting to the stress or responding to the stress. When we react to the stress, it comes from a place of emotion, versus when we respond, it comes from a place of acknowledging that emotion and then using and engaging the rational mind to ultimately think through that action. So that's where I like to encourage anybody, if there's any stress that comes up that's attached with a negative emotion, do yourself a favor to pause for a second, breathe, and then just think. Just think, what is going to happen if I do this? Versus, we all know we've been in that position where something happens and we immediately say we get angry and we may fire off the first thing that comes to mind. That typically causes more stress. So just do all of ourselves a favor, take a deep breath, pause, and just let it go.
Brilliant. And that is such an incredibly profound point, Aneesh. The idea that we can respond to our emotions by acknowledging them. And, the neocortex takes longer to process it. Of course, our primitive brain, which is instant. So we do have to push the internal pause button, as Steve Covey would say, give ourselves that pause to think, to engage our higher rational mind. So thank you, Aneesh, very much. And this is Dr. Duffy Spencer saying goodbye for now and wishing you great relationships.